Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Marco and the Fish on the Walker Talks Radio Network. How you doing, Marco?
Doing great, Fish. Ready to talk some MLB with you. Let's do it.
Man, we're going to do it, man. Of course, we're getting into that, we're getting into that sweet spot, that sports fan sweet spot where literally everything is about to intersect in the next couple of months. But what we're talking about today, we're doing a little more baseball talk as they just had the Major League Baseball trade deadline come and go a couple weeks after the All-Star game. So now we have an actual look for the most part outside of things like, well, September call-ups, but, you don't bank on those type of things to win World Series. So what we're looking at here is what these teams now look like after the trade deadline has come and gone, and what it's going to look like for this mad dash for about the last 60 games of the regular season, if you will. So every team in Major League Baseball, Marco, made a move. 30 teams made moves of one or some insignificant, some maybe paradigm shifting, who knows, but every team was active in the trade deadline this year.
Yeah, absolutely an exciting deadline. A deadline where some of those top guys we thought were going to get moved ended up not getting moved. But I think a lot of teams made a lot of interesting moves, both teams that are on the contending end of things, but also teams on the other end of things. A lot of really good moves in terms of retooling the systems, and definitely a very consequential deadline, I think, not just for this season, for the future of Major League Baseball.
Yeah, I agree. And we'll focus a lot on the contenders, but we'll also take a look at those who sold, everything that wasn't nailed down and what that means for them going forward. So what do you think, Mark? You want to start off with the National League, start off with the National League East? How about
Yeah,
that?
let's do
Let's
it.
start right there. Three really real contenders, if you will, though. Mets better get some things going together. But right now, Philadelphia on top, but clearly not playing their best baseball of the season. They've kind of forgotten how to hit the ball, which was a little bit of a surprise. The Yankees came in and did what they did to them. But let's talk about some of the additions they made. Brought in Austin Hayes from the Orioles, Carlos Estevez from the Angels. Did the Phillies need to do enough or need to do a lot, and did they do enough to cement themselves as one of the top two or three teams in all of Major League Baseball?
Yeah, I think the Phillies were coming at it into a very interesting area coming to this trade deadline. I think Bryce Harper had the quote, and he said it best, where, sometimes at the end of the day, you just need your superstars to show up. Where the Phillies weren't a team where you could look down up and down their roster and see a lot of glaring holes. There wasn't a lot of spots where you can say, okay, they fixed this. This is really going to elevate them. With that being said, I really like bringing Estevez from the Angels. I really think solidifying that bullpen. Any team that's looking to make a deep run into October, having those guys at the back end of your bullpen, having depth back there, having multiple arms you can lean on, that's definitely a strong thing. I like the Austin Hayes move too. I do think he has the potential to slot in, maybe even move into an everyday spot in that outfield. So I think they did exactly what they needed to do. I didn't really see them as a team going into it where, okay, these are guys. This is a team where I really need to see a lot. I need to see a lot of activity. I think they were more so in a spot where they just really need the guys that they have to start playing like the way that we know they can play. So I think given their needs, I think they did enough. I think they were already at that tier. And like I said again, unfortunately, and we're going to get into this later, I think some of those other teams at their same tier did better to address their needs. But all in all, if you're looking at the Phillies in a vacuum, I think they had a pretty good deadline.
I do too. I find it interesting, though. They moved, of course, with them moving Dominguez and Soto to Baltimore, that they moved them. It seemed very lateral to me, but interesting that they would send them to somebody that they could very well see later on, and that's vice versa for both of those teams. I mean, they're really kind of both in the same situation in that regards, and it'll be interesting to see if who knows down. It would be a great World Series. I'd love to see that, but it's interesting that those two did business together. Now I know they're different leagues, but those are both serious contenders. There's no doubt. So did the Phillies get better? Maybe. They were already when the Phillies, especially with their depth and their rotation, when the Phillies are good, they're the best. I think when the
Mm-hmm.
Phillies are playing their best, I don't know if you agree with that, but I think when the Phillies are at their very best, they're the best team in all of Major League Baseball. I don't see any game-changing moves here, but some maintenance things here. A few pin arms going on the other way. So we'll see what happens. I like what Philly did. Don't love it. Taking a
Mm-hmm.
look inside the division there, Atlanta. They were the beneficiaries of a very confusing team for me in the Major League Baseball trade deadline, and that's the San Francisco Giants. And we'll get to them in just a minute. But they sent Jorge Soler back to Atlanta. Of course, Atlanta's had so many injuries they've had to deal with. Can Soler be a big difference maker, him along with Luke Jackson? Can they be a big difference maker for the Braves? They're going to need it in this wild card chase.
Yeah, this was a move that, to be honest with you, I wasn't really that high on. I mean, to be completely honest, it felt kind of like a vibes move almost, bringing back the guy from 2021, to energize the fans. Now, look, Soler's a tremendous hitter, and believe me, we all know the Braves need hitting, but where are you going to slot him in? I mean, your best hitter all year has been Marcell Ozuna, and there's only one DH, there's only one DH in the lineup. You're not going to want to put Soler out in the field. I mean, if you're putting him out in the outfield, he might cost you more runs than he gets you with his bat. So it's a weird move in terms of the actual fit. I'm not particularly high on this move, to be completely honest with you, Fish.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think they've had a lot of issues with those arms, now, because Fried struggled obviously with injuries this year. For me, this should have been more about solidifying more pieces in the rotation. And I agree with you. I don't know where this team would be without Ozuna. Marcell Ozuna has saved this team at times this year. I still don't. But to be a contender in the National League and into the potential for the World Series, I'm going to need to see that rotation. Now, don't get me wrong. Schwellenbach, with him developing, has certainly helped, but that would be uncharted territory for him. I'm looking for a veteran. Go get him. Of course, now let's not kid ourselves. The price for that in this market, as we saw, was extremely high. Of course, having said that, Jack Flaherty didn't exactly go for a mountain, but we'll get to that in just a minute. But some of these relief trades kind of set the market so high that you looked at it and you said, Marco, there's only a few of real available names out there. Everybody wants Crochet, but you're going to have to give up your franchise for somebody like at that point. So you think that's why they didn't go there a little with a little more fervency, is because the price was so high in this trade deadline?
Yeah, I definitely think that could definitely have played into the reasons why they maybe weren't as active as you would have liked to see them. I think it also could be a case where maybe, the guys up in the front office are looking at it. They're looking at what other teams are giving up. They're looking at the fact that there are a lot of teams kind of at the same spot as they are in the NL. And maybe, they're not going to say this out loud, but maybe they're deciding, hey, this just might not be our year. Maybe this isn't the year that we're going to sell out and go for everything, especially in a year where they have had so many injuries. Maybe it's more of a strategy of, look, obviously we're going to want to do well. We're going to want to make the playoffs. We want to win the World Series every year, but we're not going to sell our future in a year where we don't think we have the best shot. We think there are other teams better positioned. It could have been a case of that. I'm not sure. All I know is if they were serious about contending this year, serious about winning a World Series, you would have liked to see a lot more moves made.
Now let's move on to the New York Mets, who clearly what the Mets wanted to do at the trade deadline was solidify their bullpen. They did that. They brought in three pieces, and we'll see, we'll see what that means. But obviously the messages here at trade deadline is we need to do something on the back end. That's what they did. They got active, went out there and got some names from the pen from other teams to bring and try to solidify that thing. The question is, and they're one of about six teams within about 2.5 games of each other in that wild card right now. They're not catching Philadelphia. I think we can all agree with that. So their goal right now is to try to secure one of those three wild card spots, however that goes. Did they do enough? I'm a little concerned with the Mets here, right now. I don't know if they did enough.
Yeah, I liked their deadline, to be completely honest with you. I think, like you said, they did a good job of identifying what their needs were, which were pitching help, specifically in the bullpen, and executing on those needs. I don't think also, when you look at what they gave away for the guys that they got, I don't think they were one of those teams that really massively overpaid. And in the way the market was, functioning this year, a couple of teams definitely fell victim to that. Is it going to be enough? That's going to be left up to time. I really don't know if it's going to be enough, to be honest with you. The Mets have always felt like a team for me this year where I've never really been buying it, to be completely honest with you. Now, that might be my own allegiances, my own personal feelings towards that team, maybe clouding my judgment a little bit. But to be honest with you, I haven't seen the Mets as a team that, yeah, sure, maybe they're going to make the wild card spot. They definitely are in contention there. But I don't really see them having the juice necessarily to make a push into October. I do like Jesse Winker also as a pickup. I think he's a guy that can maybe take over for DJ Stewart, provide a little more oomph with his left-handed bat.
Knows the division already.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, great point for sure. Ryan Stanek was a guy that I liked that they got for sure. I don't know if it was enough to really elevate them any further, but in terms of they're definitely a lot better positioned, in my opinion, now to make a run at that wild card. If I'm looking at the Mets from, July 28th versus now, I'm definitely feeling a lot better about them if I'm a Mets fan.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't think you're going to be able to slug your way into the World Series this year. You know what I
No.
mean? So, at least nothing else, you better be able to protect a lead. A couple teams, real quick. We'll just hit those real quick. In the National League East, of course, the Nationals. It's interesting because of trades over the last year or two. They're probably going to be in position for a wild card potentially next year.
Hmm.
Next year here. So they didn't have to do a whole heck of a lot here. That's not that. This wasn't what that was about. Just add a few pieces here and there, and they did that. They got some nice prospects from the Guardians and the Mets. This was about continuing to build that process. This was about. You look right below them in Miami. That was a complete overhaul. I mean, now they landed a bevy of prospects in multiple different trades. But boy, if you look at that lineup, if you look at that rotation in that lineup now, what are you clinging to? I mean, all their pieces are just gone. You got Jazz Chisholm in New York doing his thing. Tanner Scott's gone. Arrives was traded earlier in the season. There's just not a lot of meat left on that bone, but they certainly have that farm system stocked big time. So while it's not 2024, some of these hit, and those are all lottery tickets, and we know that. But some of those cash in 2026 could be fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, Miami's a team. You look at them, they added 9 guys who slotted into their top 30 prospect pool. For a team that's bad, for a team that is years away from contending, that's about as good of a deadline as you can hope for. They pulled in a lot of guys. They also pulled in guys who are maybe closer to being MLB ready than, some other prospects out there. Kyle Stowers is a guy that really excites me personally. So I think Miami, all things considered, had a very, very good deadline for the position that you're in. But, as we're saying, as a fan, it's kind of hard to be like, okay, so I'll be excited in 2 years, but yeah, it's going to be tough days for the Marlins
We're
going
used
forward.
to that though in the 305. They've
For
done the
sure.
rebuild thing many, many times, but they've also got hardware to show for it as well. So, it's just kind of what they do. And look, Robbie Snelling, is not having a particularly great year, but he is one of the more well thought of left-handed pitching prospects in minor league baseball right now. So while it's not going well at the moment, things could change there. Let's head over to the National League Central, and leading the way all season long has been a team who honestly, I got to be, that's totally been of all the teams. I did pretty well so far to this point in the season, but the team that I tragically missed on was the Milwaukee Brewers. I thought the departure of Burns meant the departure of any chance of anything, and especially with some of these young teams and the lineups that they have in the National League Central. Like think about it, the Reds and the especially the Pirates. And of course, this was supposed to be probably Chicago's division. St. Louis is usually what they are, but nobody really counted Milwaukee, and then here they go. They've led the thing the whole way. They falter a time or two. They don't get real busy. They bring in Frankie Montas from Cincinnati, but I mean, look, I think the goal there is right now is look, of course the goal is to win the World Series, but they're not going to win the World Series. Having said that, I would have told you that the Texas Rangers weren't going to win the World Series this time last year either, so you never know. But I think this was just doing enough routine maintenance to be able to hold on and win the Central.
Yeah.
Host a series and try to get into the NLCS and see what happens.
Yeah, I think you described it perfectly. One of those teams, one of the less active teams we definitely saw on the deadline, especially of those teams that are at that kind of contending tier in the MLB, definitely very inactive. Nick Mears, another guy they got from Colorado. You always like to see what these pitchers can do when they get out of Coors Field, right? So maybe some, upward progression you're going to see there. But I mean, yeah, not a lot to talk about. Routine maintenance, I think, is the best way to describe it.
Let's take a look at the Pittsburgh Pirates. I mean, they bring in IKF, who is he's kind of a jack of all trades, nice utility player. Comes over from the Blue Jays. I think he helps this lineup for sure. Bringing over Brian De La Cruz from not to be confused with the Cruz part, but Brian De La Cruz, IKF. These are not guys who are going to put you over the top, But I tell you what they will do is they'll help you win the type of games that get you to where you want to be, that'll get you that wild card. Because I don't think they're catching Milwaukee. I don't. But guys like this, especially with injuries mounting at the second half, it's last 2 months of the season, you can always plug in a guy like IKF and play him all over the infield. Brian De La Cruz, I mean, he's nobody's superstar, but he's a nice, solid player, familiar with the National League. And I got a chance to see him. I was watching MLB Network when he found out he had gotten traded, and he was out on the field warming up before, and then he got the word. And then so you see him saying goodbye to all his teammates, and he kind of reminds you, hey, these are people. It's not just a name scrolling across on the bottom of your screen. But Pittsburgh may have done enough to keep their position where it is. Now, I will tell you this. One thing that could come back to haunt them, and certainly will help me as a Padres fan, but they traded Martin Perez to San Diego for a prospect. And Martin Perez made his San Diego start, his first San Diego start yesterday, went 6 innings, struck out 7, walked 1, gave up 1 run, and had 13 swing and misses in that game, which was a ton. Now, this is a guy that was 2-5 with a 5+ ERA, but you pair him up. This is one of the top young pitchers prospects in the game a couple of years ago, and he's had plenty of success. Now you put him with Niebla. I tell you what, I don't know if it might have been just a change of scenery thing, but the stuff that played, if that continues to play, the Pirates are going to regret letting him go.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be the first time that the Pirates let some big name pitching prospects go at the deadline.
Could you
Definitely.
imagine a world in which, of course, if you had him, that you wouldn't probably have been in that position? Because you imagine your 1-2 of your rotation being Garrett Cole and Paul Skeens.
Well, Tyler Glass now too, right? I mean,
Oh,
yeah,
that's
the
right. That's right.
yeah,
Jamison Tyone as well.
exactly. Yeah, it seems
They
like the Pirates.
drafted well. They just haven't been able to hold on to them, but they've certainly drafted well. But did they do enough to improve that roster is my question to you.
I don't think they did enough to necessarily elevate themselves in a serious way this year. But at the same time, I think this is exactly the type of deadline the Pirates needed. Not a very sexy deadline. They're not, going out and getting a big name and, selling half the farm system. But again, this is a team on the rise. Their talent that's performing right now is young. And look, they got what they needed. They got, a couple more bats to solidify that lineup. And I really think they played it smart. I really think they realized that, look, 2024, this is great what's happening. It's great if they make the playoffs. It's great if they win a series. You want all of those things. But 2025, 2026, these are the years that you need to have the system ready to go for. These are the years you should be looking for in terms of our World Series window. So I think, honestly, the Pirates, they did exactly what they should have done. Did they do enough? Maybe? No. But did they do what they should have done? Yes. If I'm a Pirates fan, I'm very happy they showed some restraint. They didn't do another Chris Archer trade where they, way overestimated the position they were in as a franchise. If I'm a Pirates fan, I'm happy with what they did.
All right, just a couple more here before we move on to the West. St. Louis Cardinals didn't do a ton. They brought Tommy Pham back home, which I never thought would happen. Then he walks right in the door and has a big moment and starting to help them already. They bring over Eric Fede from the White Sox, who, if you look at him this year, it adds up. He was what his ERA was what, mid-3s, I think, something like that. Had a winning record on a bad team, but the work previous, though, the years before that, I looked at it and I didn't really see much there, to be honest with you. But really, it only matters what you're doing now, and in 2024, because that's why they got him. That was what this was for. But the reality of the situation is, for St. Louis fans out there, who are one of the most dedicated fan bases out there, is that's great, but this rotation's not nearly good enough, and there's not near enough depth on there to try to fend off a Philadelphia, probably a Milwaukee, a San Diego, a Los Angeles, Arizona, a Mets, a Braves, any of those teams. I don't know that I could put St. Louis ahead of any of those teams in a series with that rotation, and I don't think that's enough to change my mind on that.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And just to the point, I am a Nationals fan, so believe me, nobody has more apprehension about Eric Fede than this guy. I have suffered through many years of him being abysmal. And yeah, Eric Fede is a guy that I'm happy to see he's doing well now, but I'm always going to have a little hesitation with him for sure. But yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I mean, does anybody really view the Cardinals any differently after this deadline? Like, I know for sure that I don't. Not a very inspiring deadline. You couldn't really get a clear sense of what they see their direction being as an organization. Maybe I guess that direction is just to maintain and wait, and maybe realizing this isn't their spot to like, alter their direction either way. But yeah, not a lot of confidence, not a lot of inspiration, not a lot of excitement out of what the Cardinals did at this deadline.
Let's talk real quick as we get ready to wrap up the National League Central. Cincinnati doesn't really do much. We're not going to highlight them much. They really didn't do a lot. And I think this is, boy, if they could just keep a few pieces there and surround a Hunter Green,
Yeah.
an Elliot Dela Cruz, if they could, it's guys like this, Jonathan India, if they could just keep these guys here, that's not going to do anything. They came in that game 4 games under 500 at the deadline. That's not going to change anything. I don't think the Reds are. I just don't. I don't know what the plan is right now. Yeah, with Chicago Cubs, I was really interested to see the move that sent Christopher Morel out of town to the Yankees. I was curious because it almost looked like they were buying. Then they sent Leiter over to the Yankees, but it almost looked like they were buying, and last place teams generally don't buy. Overall, I think it kind of balanced itself out. But initially, at the beginning, it looked like they were getting a buy signal, if you will.
Yeah, the Cubs really confused me, honestly, with what they did. Coming into this deadline, I expected a guy like Ian Happ maybe to get moved. Tyler, and like we talked about, these were guys I was definitely expecting them, considering the position that they're in. But yeah, really confusing moves by the Cubs, to be completely honest with you. I hope that they have a plan. I hope that they know what they're doing. But you kind of hit the nail on the head there. We're stuck almost between buying and selling. I really don't know what they're doing. I wish I had, better analysis to give you, but I'm just as confused as I think most people are.
If it's not there, it's not there. And there's nothing much to say. I mean, that's just kind of is what it is. Let's go to the National League West and the Los Angeles Dodgers, who began today's play, 4.5 games up? On the division lead, and their struggles. Now, I know they won 10-0 yesterday, but the day before that, the A's beat them to kick off that series, and that means look, the A's are playing better. But the Dodgers, man, boy, they need Mookie and Muncy or something. Now, I know they went and got Jack Flaherty and Kevin Kiermaier, and Tommy Edman and people like that, Ahmed Rosario. These are. I like the Edman play for him. I think he can play. You can plug him into a few positions. Of course, they've been dealing with injuries as far as that goes. But clearly, their move was Jack Flaherty there, and the reality is, and that's great. They needed to do so, but the reality is, all it's doing is supplementing all the losses they've had in this rotation with Yamamoto and Buehler, and all the times they've been. Kershaw. He had his first outing the other day. It looked all right. Got slapped around a little bit. But, I mean, the Dodgers, even when they get Mookie back, and they'll get Mookie back, and get Muncy healthy going again, the injuries to their pitching staff over the last year to 2 years have decimated this team. They should be – I mean, look, don't get me wrong. This team's, 19 games over 500. I'm not saying that, it's time to push the panic button, but the Dodgers – the only good news here is they didn't have to give up a whole heck of a lot to get Jack Flaherty, especially when we saw so many trades before them and what they had to give up. All things considered, he almost fell in their lap.
Yeah, absolutely. But you got to consider the reason for that. And that's because the concerns about his health, I mean, as if the Dodgers needed another pitcher with health concerns, right? I mean, so this is one of those moves, in my opinion, where it has a very high variable factor, because if he can't stay healthy, if he can't provide them the innings they need down the road, it's a total bust. Now, I do like what they did from a sense of, look, identifying where they needed to get better, which was in the rotation. They needed better depth on their bench. And you know what? They went out, they got guys. They didn't have to sell the farm, So I think they did pretty well in that aspect. But, it's always hard to say, like you said, you don't want to push the panic button. But for the Dodgers, considering the scale that they're on with the success that they've had over the last decade, I mean, you have 2 teams in the Padres and the Diamondbacks within striking distance in the division. There's definitely some concern in Los Angeles. And I do like the guys that they got. Kevin Kiermaier, I think, is an underrated move. A guy so
Didn't
strong.
He announce he's going to be retiring at the end of the season?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. But in terms of, having that defensive piece to bring in, these are the types of guys late in postseason games, a defensive substitution in center. That's a guy who could potentially make a difference for a team like the Dodgers where, they're not going to bring in a guy who's going to be that like everyday player. They just have too many talented guys on their roster. So considering what they needed, I like what they did. But if you're looking at the overall outlook on their team, especially with the expectations they had coming into this year, definitely not ideal in Los Angeles. Now, I'm not saying, look, I know better than to write the Dodgers off with the talent that they have. They get some of these guys back and these guys come back hot and they come back hitting and they come back producing. I could very easily see the Dodgers being the last team standing at the end of October.
Oof, boy, maybe, but it's a bit, I guess. Look, and it's just because I'm a Padres fan. I mean, I don't dislike the Dodgers, but I just don't see the arms there. I just don't, and I don't think that they can slug their way to a World Series. There are too many teams out there that have solid lineups close to theirs who have solidified rotations.
That is true.
And so I know it says Dodgers on the front, and maybe that's when they mess around and win it, because we've seen them with stacked rotations and go nowhere. So we'll see. Let's look at San Diego. Now, San Diego made a very clear message right away that what they wanted to do was solidify their bullpen. And after Mason Miller went down with that was it a finger fracture? I think it was for the A's. Tanner Scott became the number one guy on the relief market, and you were going to have to pay a high price between what they paid Miami for Tanner Scott and what they paid Tampa for Jason Adam. As far as pitching products, look, the goal going into that draft or to that Major League trade deadline was to walk out and still have Leo Devers and Ethan Salas in that farm system. AJ Preller was able to do that.
Yeah,
he gave away everything else, but I mean, and I've heard so much bellyache, and I can't believe he's giving all this, and this away. Two things to remember: nobody plays the international market better than AJ Preller. Salas and Devers are both international market players who signed with him because of his connections, because what he did to go down there into Latin America and build those things up and build those relationships, live down and to spend a year down in the Dominican, and scouting when nobody else was, doing all these things. He rebuilds that way. And if he sees that it's not working, he takes these viable pieces that people want and trades them to playoff contenders and restocks the farm system. So I'm not concerned at all. And by the way, the big names that he was giving up have been trending downwards as far as prospect goes lately, like a Dylan Lesko in the trade that brought in Jason Adam. Dylan Lesko, while he was, just because you're a first round pick, that's great, but they're not producing in the minors. And if I can take that and turn it into a rock solid bullpen, I can take it and say, okay, guys, give me 3 or 4 runs and I'll hand the ball off to the bullpen in the 6th inning and we're golden. As a Padre fan, I can tell you this: it was worth it. That is probably the best bullpen in baseball now.
I think it's absolutely
top 2.
I mean, they were already one of the best bullpens in baseball coming into this deadline, and just adding the guys that they did. I mean, Tanner Scott, a lefty with an electric fastball. Fish, did you know he's only given up 1 extra base hit on that fastball this entire year? I mean, outstanding stuff, a sit-down slider as well. And to Padres fans, if they're upset about Preller, dishing out the farm system, what do you expect? I mean, this is his MO, at a certain point, you can't be surprised when a guy does what he does. I mean, this is the way he builds teams. And, absolutely, the Padres are in a great spot this year. We just talked about it, but with a weakened Dodgers, the NL West is still very much in play, still very much in contention.
No doubt. Yeah,
and
no doubt.
That bullpen now, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. 3 or 4 runs in October, you give the ball to that bullpen, you can pretty much forget about it if things go the way I anticipate them going. So I'm sure, you as a Padres fan, you can tell me this, but I'm sure Padres fans are feeling great coming out of this deadline.
Oh, and remember Martin Perez yesterday's first appearance, 6 innings, 7 strikeouts, 1 run ball. And I think AJ Preller looked at it and said, we're about to get Joe Musgrove back. He's doing a rehab assignment today. And if you are Darvish, who has some personal issues with his family's health, we'll see if he gets back. But he's thinking, I don't have to mortgage for a big starter. I'm going to get Joe Musgrove and you Darvish back. And solidified my bullpen. I don't have to give anything else away for this. And I think that was the thought process behind that. With Arizona and, of course, Torlavello's slithering snakes have been red hot in the last month or so. AJ Puck, I like this. AJ Puck, I liked AJ all the way back to his days in Gainesville at Florida. But I think he's been given a new lease on his career, leaving Miami, heading over to Arizona. This is just what he needed. I think Puck's going to be a very nice addition. And of course, bringing in Josh Bell back. And you know what? You know what that is? That's left-handed power. It's inconsistent, but it's left-handed power.
Yeah, absolutely. Another team that
DH role or something like that.
Yeah, and a very fairly riskless move too in terms of getting Josh Bell. But again, Arizona, another team where they saw where they were weak. They were very weak in the bullpen. Coming to the deadline, they were ranked 27th in bullpen WAR in the MLB. That's just not good enough if you want to go on another run, and they knew that. Dylan Puck, also Dylan Floro from the Nationals, another bullpen arm that they brought in. So I think a good deadline overall by the Diamondbacks. Not many giant life-changing moves, but look, they got better. They're in a good position. And, it's one of those things where it's a crowded field around that NL wildcard spot, but they're in a position where they have the guys, they have the roster. Who's to say they can't do it again?
Let's look at San Francisco, who was another very confusing team for me because it looked like, okay, you had a chance to move Blake Snell, which, I mean, look, he throws a no-hitter first time after you don't move him. But you traded Jorge Soler. You traded Luke Jackson. You traded Alex Cobb. So why are you holding on to Blake Snell? Who is more than likely not going to re-sign with you. Now, that's not a guarantee. But if you're selling those pieces and you were already behind, why would you not trade Blake Snell then?
I mean, I think the Giants had one of the worst deadlines out of any MLB team. I mean, lack of direction. What are you doing? I mean, if you're going to sell, you sell. You sell your biggest asset, your biggest horse, I mean, we can't see into the future. We don't know if Snell stays, but it's a very good shot that he leaves for nothing. I mean, and at that point, you're going to be looking back, kicking yourself, because let's not pretend there wasn't going to be a market for Blake Snell. I mean, if you want to move that guy, there are so many contending teams chopping at the bit for a starting pitcher like that. I mean, come on now.
I was looking at Baltimore and I said, okay, Baltimore could find a way. And I thought they were going to try. And if you'd have brought him in, you'd have been looking at the last two National League Cy Young winners back to back in an American League rotation. I mean, you want to combat that Yankee lineup, that's how you do that. Something like that. You want to stiff the Guardians, that's how you do that. Let's head over to the American League. Let's talk about those Orioles. They had a confusing trade deadline for me. There was lots of movement. There's no doubt about that, bringing in Sir Anthony Dominguez, Gregory Soto, both those guys from Philly. I like the move to bring in Zach Eflin from Tampa. That much I like. The Trevor Rogers, I thought they kind of overpaid for, and I was kind of confused when the trade happened too, and they were talking about it, and they said, what's the role here? He's not coming out of the pen, I don't think. He never has before, right? I don't know what the plan for these new additions are. I mean, look, they got rid of a ton of prospects. There's no doubt about that. They could afford that, though. This farm system was the best farm system because it had the depth, so they didn't mind moving a bunch of pieces at this point. But guys that were there, like Connor Norby, Kyle Stowers, these are guys that I like. Trey McGough, these are guys that I don't really understand. Look, they needed to do a thing or two, maybe solidify that bullpen, especially because Kimbrel's kind of being Kimbrel again. And sometimes that's great, sometimes that's bad. And right now it's in the bad stage, if you will. So I understand why they wanted to make some moves in the pen. We'll see. Dominguez has been in big games for a couple of years. He has. I guess my question is with the Orioles, with all this movement, there's a lot of it, but how much better did they get?
Yeah, I think I might be a little higher on the Orioles deadline than you are. They're one of the teams that I was really, really pleased with. One of the more active teams for sure, but I like Eflin, I like Rogers. I think the key thing about getting those two guys is both of those guys, the Orioles have control over them for next year. So if you're looking at a guy like Corbin Burns potentially leaving, you're almost kind of restocking in the event of that if you're looking forward. Eloy Jimenez, another move too, where I think this guy can be a real X factor for them.
Yeah.
Look, here's the thing. He's a very boomer bust type of acquisition here. I can very well see them getting him and him really not doing much for them. But at the same time, if he started showing us flashes of what we saw in the past, I mean, look out. Another bat coming in like that. I mean, that's a very exciting prospect for me. Beefing up the bullpen, like you said, getting guys too with big game experience, something I was really pleased about. So I'm actually pretty high on what the Orioles did. I think they came out looking a lot better. Again, clear direction, obviously, as a contender. And like you said, they have the wealth of prospects to maybe hit some slight overpays, maybe lose a couple guys that you would have liked to hold on to. They still have plenty of young talent, waiting in the wings, ready to go. So I'm a big fan of what the Orioles did.
Let's go to the team that they're right in step with the American League East title on the line, and that's the New York Yankees. The Yankees didn't bring a ton of players in. One player that they did bring in who has paid immediate returns so far is Jazz Chisholm with the bat. And we've even seen him play in third, which is not a natural position for him, but the Yankees have the need. But the bat sure is playing. And hey, even though that team was the highest scoring team in the league coming into the trade deadline, they scored more runs than anybody else. The back end of that lineup, so there's so much strength and production coming from the top half of that lineup. They need a little more. This certainly helps that. Another big bat. Come playoff time when games are going to be 4-3. You need to scratch a run. You need some potential there. He offers you that, man. And if, there's some veterans in that roster, come under the wing of an Aaron Judge. Guys like that can really help Jazz kind of find his thing. I like the addition of Mark Leiter Jr. He came in immediately and paid dividends for the Yankees. Now, Inyel De Los Santos, I've watched him all year long. That's not really going to do much for their bullpen, to be real honest with you. But I do like the addition of Jazz Chisholm. They continue to dole out prospects to get the people that they want. They've had them, and they're not afraid to use them now. And that's how they have re-solidified this lineup. My question to you is, have they done enough in this rotation? Because I have no doubt that they can hit the baseball. But what I will say is they came into the trade deadline, I think only 7 teams had given up fewer runs than the Yankees, so it's not as if the Yankees were bereft of talent in their rotation. I just don't know if they really beefed it up all that much.
Yeah, I don't think the Yankees did enough in this deadline. I love getting Jazz, obviously. I mean, already paying dividends, like you said, a very versatile guy. A guy can play multiple positions. They definitely need another bat, but I think they needed more pitching help. I think they needed more help in the bullpen, too. Leiter's great, obviously. That's a great arm, but I think they could have used 1 or 2 more impact guys to bring in to beef it up. The American League is going to be a gauntlet. Just the Orioles alone in that division, that's a team that I can't sit here and say that I'm confident that they're better than. And if I'm a Yankees fan, that's what I wanted to see from this deadline. I wanted them to go out, grab a guy that I say, okay, looking at them now, they're a lot better in terms of pitching. Now, getting Jazz, obviously, I don't want to underscore that move at all. I think that was a great move. One of the biggest names we saw dealt at this deadline. But I don't think they did enough on the pitching end of things, and that would concern me if I'm a Yankees fan.
The Red Sox really didn't do anything. And they added a couple relief pitchers here. I think they understand that they are not catching the Yankees and the Orioles. They're quite aware of that. They're in fight for the wild card mode, but I think they believe they're good enough as they are for that. And I think they're right, by the way. I absolutely think they're right that they'll be in one of those wild card spots or fighting for it. But as far as the additions, there was nothing that's going to, unless there's somebody you want to mention, take a look at. I didn't see much that really moved the needle for them.
No, not a very exciting team to me, both overall and in the deadline. I think they realize this isn't their year at the end of the day.
Boy, how about Tampa? We're not used to it like this. What do people always say? You don't trade with the Rays because they'll get you. They'll get you. And I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. Now, they have proven to win trades in the past. There's no doubt about that. And they're very savvy, and they understand who they are, and they understand what their plan is. And this is another one of those resets. There's no doubt they had tons of good pieces, and they're flipping them and turning them into other things. I like Christopher Morel. Dylan Carlson was a nice get for the Cardinals. I think that might be one of those change of scenery type of deals. I think Horvath, the prospect from the Orioles, was a good get for them. I mentioned Dylan Lesko a few minutes ago. Lesko and Homer Bush Jr., by the way, who's a speedy guy. I don't know how the bat plays, but if Lesko can find his control, he had the best slider in the draft coming out. He had been injured, but he's got the stuff. But they completely overhauled that farm system again, and I think that was the goal for this trade deadline, don't you?
Yeah, I think it was a great deadline for the Rays. Adding 8 prospects who immediately jump into their top 30 within their system. That's a great deadline for them. Dylan Carlson, a guy that I definitely wanted to highlight. It almost feels like one of those typical players that the Rays, they get their hands on him and then he turns it around all of a sudden. Yeah, I think the Rays did a good job of like being realistic about where their team was at and making the moves that needed to be made.
Let's take a look at one more team in the American League East, and that's the Toronto Blue Jays. Restock, baby. That was the deal. Restock. What I was really surprised by was the haul that they got back from the Astros. And I talked to a member of the Astros organization on the show the other day, and they were a little bit surprised too. They knew what they wanted, and of course they got themselves a very solid, what you call it, Kikuchi, a 3 receiver, good grief, pitcher as far as that rotation goes. But Jake Bloss and Joey Loperfido, that's a huge price to play. Not to mention you traded Billy Wagner's son out of the organization and still into the American League. So the Sox were quite active. There's no doubt, but I think they realized that they missed their window. I think they realized that. And hey, look at this. They, for the most part, restocked that thing and were able to hold on to Vladimir Guerrero Jr.
Yeah, this is another team.
This can't be looked at as a failure by Toronto, I don't think.
No, another team I think had a very great deadline. The Kikuchi trade, that's one of those trades that when you look at the grand scheme of everything that's happened, jumps off the page at me for both sides. Obviously we'll talk about the Astros side in a bit, but I think Toronto got one of the in terms of value for what they gave up and the guys they got back, one of the best value trades we saw. Jake Bloss, arguably a better player than Kikuchi. I mean, like, if you look at the numbers wise, I mean, he's a guy who struggles, sure, but that's an MLB ready player, ready to go. And 8 top 30 prospects again that they brought in who slot into their system. And I think the key point that you mentioned, they keep Vlad, they keep Bichette, definitely more of like a retooling versus a total rebuild. I can see, especially the guys they brought in, the prospects, a lot of them are very close to the big leagues. So this could be a team where, maybe their window with their pass score is gone, but look, these are guys that could be ready to go, could be producing while you still have some juice with Vlad and Bo. I love what the Blue Jays did.
And for the Astros, they don't generally part with their prospects. They're well thought of prospects like that. And boy, they did. So maybe they believe that puts them back. I mean, this is clearly, it's been a great rally to get back into first place here, but they are clearly at best the 4th team in the American League right now. And generally when they do stuff, they've been the best or the second best. And I think this felt like more desperation than anything else than they would normally do, trying to get up there with the Baltimore, New York, and Clevelands of the world. And by the way, let's not forget about Minnesota too. Minnesota, I'm not going to leave them out like they haven't done anything. They're playing quite well. But I think overall it was about retooling the system there in Tampa and Toronto, and they've done both. And of course, at least for Toronto, held on to more key figures. Now, let's take a look at Cleveland in the AL Central. And they didn't do hardly anything, but I got to be honest with you. They did bring in Lane Thomas from the Nationals, and I do like that. I like Lane Thomas quite a bit. I know you're a Nationals fan. I don't know if you do. I like Lane Thomas. He can swing it. Bring over Alex Cobb, but those aren't now we're ready type of moves. But I don't know that they needed to make now we're ready type of moves. Cleveland's, I think they're just about good as they are.
Yeah, I don't know. I was pretty underwhelmed, honestly, with what Cleveland did. Lane Thomas is a guy that I love. Lane Thomas is a guy, he can do everything for you. He's a good defender. He's going to give you some power. He's going to hit for contact. He gets on base. Love acquiring Lane Thomas. Now, they did pay kind of a hefty fee. They did have to part with some pretty high-end prospects to get him. But I loved bringing in Lane Thomas. Now, the Alex Cobb move, that's the one that leaves me scratching my head a little bit, just because he was the only pitcher they brought in. Now, this is a guy, sure, he was an all-star last year, but do we really know what they're getting out of him coming off of this injury? I mean, to me, it's just like it's too, risky of a move to then not also go out and get other guys. I think they really could have benefited from adding 1 or 2 more consistent pitchers. Look, at the end of the day, I feel pretty safe about them picking them to win that division. Obviously, we talked about Minnesota, Kansas City. These are good teams, but I feel good about them in that division. But look, if you think that your team is good enough to contend this year, you got to show me more, especially when you have a team like Baltimore, teams like the Yankees. These teams are in your way. You got to do something to catch up to those teams. And I mean, sure, if Alex Cobb comes back and is his 2023 self and, balls out, then it's going to look like a great move. And maybe it was all that they needed, but I don't feel confident banking on that.
The only thing I would say about that is we talk about them needing to catch Baltimore and New York. Don't the Guardians have the best record in the league right now, or in the American League? I mean, why are we trying to catch them? This is a team who already had the best bullpen in the league and may still. It depends on how you feel about San Diego's moves, but they have the best bullpen. They rake all day long. They play smart, tough baseball. I watch the Guardians, and they are probably one of my. If I think about a team that I would want to play in a series the least, they're right up there at it. And I think they looked at this and said, we don't need to change much here. A piece or two here, an Alex Cobb, and that's the thing about it. Okay, if that doesn't pan out, all right. But they're going to be fine even if it doesn't. But if it does, and then you add Thomas in there to go with that pin, they just didn't need to do much. And I like where they're at. I do. I like where Cleveland did quite a bit. My boys just went through a whole series on the East Coast, man, playing all the top teams. And I'm gonna tell you right now, even though they took 2 or 3 from the Guardians they're just rock solid, man. They're kind of like who would be who would be an NFL comparison, kind of like the Ravens. The Ravens are just solid across the board. They're very, very good at some things, but they don't have a whole lot of what you would consider to be a weakness of a unit. Well, neither does Cleveland. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with them not making a lot because I don't think they needed to make a lot. And Minnesota did nothing at all. Now
Mm-hmm.
they made one move, but it's not going to change anything about who they are. Kansas City brings in Lucas Ursay, and Paul DeYoung, Michael Lorenzen. Those are all names that we know. That
Mm-hmm.
that could help this team out, and it's interesting because nobody's talking about this team. I'm gonna ask you a question. Could this be now? They might. Well, no, they have that too. Could this be the 2024 Texas Rangers?
I don't know if I would go that far. I think there are definitely gaps in terms of the high end talent, maybe. But what I will say is Kansas City had one of my favorite and kind of more under the radar deadlines. The Lucas Ursing move, that's a move. That's one of my favorite moves of the entire deadline, solely because this is a guy, they have 5 more years of control on this guy. And, when you're looking at a team like Kansas City, a team that isn't one of those, big market organizations that's, really willing to throw money around, get, whoever the hot commodity is every year, making smart moves like that, bringing in guys that are going to be around that you can count on for the years to come. That's a move that I really love. In terms of the Rangers comparisons, I do kind of see it in terms of the team makeup, just kind of like the overall vibe of the season, where they're both at. Um, I don't know if they have the juice necessarily to, take them all the way there. But look, if you had asked me this time last year, does Texas have a shot? I would have written them completely off. I would have been like, no, there's not quite there yet. So look, anything can happen, but if I'm a Royals fan, I'm pretty happy with what they did, and especially when you look at that in conjunction with the Twins' lack of action, I think the Royals really took a step forward and solidified themselves as that second best team in the AL Central.
How about this? How about this prediction for it? And I'm not really making this prediction. A September call up, a fast track of Cags, and putting him in that lineup in the DH role there with Bobby Witt Jr. for a wild card series.
Oof, I mean, yeah, you don't
Man,
want to see those
that's
guys.
not going to happen, but it would be fun. It would be something to look at. With Detroit, let's talk about Detroit real quick. Detroit, I think now in the Dodgers trade, the Lorenzo is obviously the big haul there for the Tigers here. But I think it's the move that they didn't make. Derek Skubal. Now somebody would have had to pay beyond through the nose, but let's just say they did. What's the message in Detroit then? I mean, you have to put your foot down in the ground and say, okay, here's where we start to compete. I think they thought this might be that year. And at times, and especially early on, it kind of looked like that. But this team still clearly is just not there yet. Of course, and you look at it, man. You look at Scooble and Flaherty and guys like that. I mean, he's like, okay, keep these guys in town, build around them. Now with Flaherty, that's a little bit different, but he's kind of turning back into his ace self a little bit. And if you can if you're a mid-level organization and you got two aces, you can do something with that. You can build around that. So I think it's time, and hopefully it wasn't just a matter of nobody was going to pay this insane ransom that you were going to have to get to get Scooble. But hopefully it was more along the lines of we're ready to start building around guys like this.
Yeah, that's definitely a really interesting perspective to look at it from. One that I really hadn't taken into account, to be completely honest with you. Scooble was one of those guys, I kind of mentioned at the beginning that there were definitely some names that we expected to be moved that weren't. That's kind of number one on that list for me. I think, maybe I was leaning more towards the thought process of it was just too much of a king's ransom that no team was willing to part with. But it is an interesting point. And look, you hit the nail on the head. We've been waiting for Detroit for a while. Detroit's been a team. They've had prospects. They've kind of made moves to kind of signal they're going to contend. I mean,
guys like that. Yeah.
I can remember when they went out and got Javi Baez and were saying, okay, this is the guy. We're ready to go now. And obviously that hasn't panned out. Yeah, Detroit, a team. I don't know. I really expected, I guess, from my mindset of expecting Scooble to be moved and then him not being moved, that kind of frames it to me in more of a disappointing light. But look, if they are coming at it from your philosophy of, hey, we want to keep this guy because we think we're going to be able to build around him, then I guess you can't be too upset. Look, they got a decent haul for Flaherty. All things considered with the injury concerns and all of that, I think if you're looking at it, just off of his ability, you would have liked to get more. But look, all things considered, they got a decent haul. Got 4 prospects that jump into their top 30. So yeah, we'll see what happens moving forward for Detroit.
And with the White Sox, this won't take long. I think they're getting ready to lose their 20th game in a row. And that's not even an exaggeration. I mean,
they already did.
Real. You realize that's an eighth of a season? That's an eighth of a season.
If they won every single game, they could win every single game from here on out. They wouldn't be 500.
I mean, it's just, and it really, when they traded Dylan Cease before the season started, if you needed a white flag, there already was one, but that one really did it. And then, what's interesting is they don't move Garrett Crochet. I think a lot of that had to do with Crochet's representation and all the demands that they were making. And, these people are like, look, your stuff's great. It plays. There's no doubt. But, you're telling us what it's going to be, how it's going to be, what, and I think those other organizations, look, we'll manage. We'll manage that. Good luck on the south side of Chicago, and there's nothing left to build around. I mean, they didn't get anything. Not really.
Yeah.
Really. Now they would have had they moved Crochet, but they moved pieces for players. There's no idea what's going on in the south side of Chicago other than it's a complete catastrophe. Let's move on to our final division of the day. Of course, we mentioned the Kikuchi trade for the Astros, who have found new life and now lead the American League West once again. But as we mentioned, something they don't generally do, they pay through the nose with prospects for that.
Yeah, no, the Astros, another one of those teams. I was really disappointed with what I saw from them. The Kikuchi trade, shaking my head. Caleb Ferguson was the other guy they brought in. Pretty meh move on from my perspective. I don't know if it's a case of, look, you want to say, oh, they knew that, there's teams better than this year, so they didn't maybe go all out. But when you look at what they gave up, they kind of did go all out. They parted with some guys that you wouldn't want to part with. I'd be pretty disappointed if I'm an Astros fan. Look, at the end of the day, they're still a good team. They're in contention for that AL West. They're either in the lead or, half game back, someone like that with Seattle. Of course, Seattle's absolutely collapsed. But yeah, not a lot of inspiration from the Astros, and very uncharacteristically so, as you pointed out.
But Seattle, let me tell you something. We'll move to Seattle. They bring in Randy Arozarena, who's, swung a great bat there in Tampa. Came over from St. Louis a few years ago. You put him in that lineup and throw maybe in a re-energized Justin Turner, for whatever that's worth. There's plenty of pop in that lineup now. There's no doubt about that. So we'll see. I think it's more. It's one of those things where, yeah, they gave up a monster lead, and now they're looking up right now. But that's one of those teams that if they make it into the playoffs, I could see them winning a. I could see them ended up in the ALCS type
Yeah.
type deal. They have that type of ability. So I agree with you as far as that goes. But Arizona's bat does play, and it could be the difference in a wild card
Yeah.
series.
I mean, yeah, you want to talk about a team that, I mean, nobody had a more clear of a need than Seattle, right? I mean, elite pitching and bottom of the barrel hitting. If you can remember the last time we talked, they were a team I was super, super high on. So I've been pretty disappointed in the months since to see, what they've been putting down. But look, they made the right moves. They got the right guys. Didn't have to give up too much. Now it's just up to them to execute at the end of the day.
Yeah, our defending world champs didn't do a lot, but you know, didn't have to. They've got people coming back. They've had some injuries, and they're coming back, and they're hoping that will ignite them for a wild card play, a wild card push. We'll see. This team is not defending their World Series title this year. I don't think. I mean, there's just too many teams that are clearly better than they are at this point.
Yeah, I think the Rangers played this about right though. Bank on those guys that you have coming back. Really don't shake things up too much. They added Andrew Chafin, which is a move that I like for the bullpen. But it's about what I expected from them. There were reports, obviously, or rumors, I should say, that maybe a fire sale was impending, but I never really put any serious credence to that. And I think they did about what they should have done, which is, maintain, wait for your guys to come back, then take stock in the winter.
Let's talk about our last two teams. One for the Angels. I think for the Angels, the thing they did bring in a couple of nice prospects from the Phillies, but I think one of the main things that they did, or the main move that I'll talk about, is the move they didn't make, and that's trading Tyler Anderson. I was pretty surprised that did not happen. I thought, because Tyler Anderson seems just like he's not going to cost too awful much and would be a perfect back end of a rotation for a playoff series, especially a 7-game series. I was a little surprised he didn't go.
Yeah, that was another one that was pretty surprising to me as well. Really not much upside for the Angels to keep him around. I mean, I don't really see what the plan was. I don't know if it was just that they didn't get a package that they liked, what the deal with that was. But yeah, another guy was very, very surprised not to see him be moved.
And finally with the A's, I mean, guys, the A's are playing pretty darn good baseball right now. If y'all hadn't been watching, I don't know where this came from or how this is happening, but it is. But it's interesting. Two guys on that now. It's the A's, and so their future is, who knows. But two guys that I would have told you 3 weeks ago are definitely getting moved are Mason Miller. And that really cost the A's from a haul standpoint because he was going to require a lot. But the other one that they didn't make that I was a little bit surprised was Brent Rooker. Brent Rooker swung a hot bat. He's got 20-plus home runs this year. He's a young guy, got some pop to that bat, would make a great addition to some wild card team, maybe or a Yankee team, somebody like that. I was really surprised that Brent Rooker is still in Oakland.
Yeah, me as well. It's actually pretty funny that you mentioned that, but Brent Rooker to the Yankees was one of those things that coming into it seemed like a match made in heaven, at least in my eyes. But yeah, no, I would be, disappointed, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word because there's a lot to be disappointed with Oakland. I think this is, maybe lower on the totem pole for the fans that they do have remaining. But yeah, I think we talked about, the last time we spoke, we said that there was no chance that Mason Miller would be in an Athletics jersey come August time. So again, disappointment,
And
but
he would not have been for
no,
that,
yeah,
save that
yeah,
injury. Look, yeah, that's you're bringing him in here to try to get you to the World Series, and you don't know how that finger's going to hold up.
no,
You know,
absolutely, yeah,
so
absolutely. But in just terms of like expectations and then expectations not being met, in terms of more of that aspect, that's where I'm getting the disappointment from. Because, like you said, circumstances outside of their control kind of played into that one. But yeah, Brent Rooker, the other one too. I mean, why are you holding on to these guys?
why hold on to him? Hey, but I'm glad for the fans' sake. Give them something to watch for sure. There's our walk through the Major League Baseball trade deadline for 2024. A lot of fun. We'll wrap it up by this. I'll ask you, Marco, one team that you felt really went above and beyond, and one team that missed their opportunity.
Yeah, I think the one team that I'm the most impressed with is the San Diego Padres, in terms of the talent that they brought in terms of the aggressive mindset, in terms of just really being focused and really clearly having a plan of this is our blueprint to how we're going to win. We're going to win by having this dominant bullpen. I was really impressed with them. And then the team that fell flat for me was the Houston Astros. I can't get over that Kikuchi trade. Parting with the guys that they parted with for a guy that's such a question mark. Yeah, really disappointed in what they did.
I would have to agree with San Diego, but I'm going to tell you why. Because I think they solidified for sure a need that they had. Yes, they had a good one, but now they have a great one, and they didn't give up any on the roster players right now. They gave up all prospects. None of them who have done a thing yet, and they've improved that parent club exponentially and didn't have to lose anything off of it to get that done. I'll take my chances there. So I think because of that, that's why I'll put them there as the winners. And I hesitate to do this one because, and this will probably throw you when I say who I just felt could have really done something more. And that's the Cardinals. And the Cardinals, they have positioned themselves right there in that wild card push, but I don't know how much better they are than they were this time last week.
Yeah.
And they had a major need, but they are a team who does not like to part with prospects. They don't like to do it. They don't have to, and they haven't had enough hit on them to be able to play with it that way. It seems it was a little too conservative for me. I think with a Jack Flaherty, bring him back home. I don't know if that's doable or something, and a Tyler Anderson, somewhere, something along the lines of front line to midline rotation. And I don't think that happened. I don't see that. So for me, if they get in, I'd be surprised where another arm, but another arm or a better arm than that, maybe propels them into that third wild card position, maybe the second. I don't think they're a wild card team now because I don't think they did enough.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think also you had to look at the other teams kind of vying for that same wild card spot. D-backs, teams kind of like that. I think they all did a lot more too. So I definitely agree with you that the Cardinals, very disappointing deadline.
Looks like a wrap, man. Hey, had a big time as we always do, Marco. I say, of course, next week we'll get back to it. We've already had preseason football's already started in the NFL, so we'll probably be getting close to taking a look at the world of football. That means college and NFL. We'll do all those things up in the upcoming season. That's my wheelhouse, and I know it is yours too, Marco. So outstanding job today, brother, and we'll get back to you next week, my friend.
Yeah, always great to talk to you. Looking forward to the future, man.
Thank you, Marco. That's another edition of Marco and the Fish right here on the Walker Talks Radio Network. We'll see you next time.